So I'm a scientist in the climate change research group at Forest Research. So we're the research agency of the Forestry Commission. Um, a lot of our work is kind of applied research for the forestry sector, but we're funded by many different organizations, the kind of public research organizations. So we kind of work a lot with university collaborators as well. Yeah, so our kind of quite handily for this project, I suppose, our main office or research station in the south or in England in general is in Alice Holt forest. So there's a long history of research in this particular area of the country. So yeah, I'm gonna jump into talking about an area of Alice Holt called the Straits Inclosure. This is a 90-hectare block of predominantly oak woodland in the very southwest of Alice Holt. So hopefully you can see my cursor. But basically most of Alice Holt extends up this way northeast of this block that you see in the picture on the right. This Straits Enclosure is a designated research forest, and there's a 25-year record of continuous carbon dioxide flux data, which is really unique within the UK. It's also a monitoring plot for ICP Forest, which is a European-wide network of sites where for sort of forest health monitoring. It's a environmental change network site, that's the ECN. So we do vegetation surveys on a regular sort of 3-year and 9-year cycle, and soil surveying, and then invertebrate surveying, birds, bats, all sorts. There's so much data collected from this Straits Enclosure. And this is the area we're going to be taking data from to hopefully feed into your project. And I say this is kind of, well, I've given you a very quick overview of what we're currently doing in there. But as I said, there's a long history of research in this area. So this book here, which is on our Forest Research website, History of Alice Holt, written in 1951, has some great photos of some early monitoring, and there's this section here on research, and mentions here about the experiments dealing with the establishment of oak are mostly situated in the Straits Enclosure. So yeah, they were doing experiments on kind of putting nurse crops, so growing the oak within more established trees. They were doing experiments on kind of frost damage prevention. They were doing all sorts in the 1920s. So yeah, this has been going on for a really long time. And actually, if we go back to this photo here in the southwest corner of the Straits Enclosure on this aerial map, you can see signs of some of these experimental treatments still in the aerial photograph today. So yeah, it's still kind of fingerprints of that of those early experiments. So yeah, the kind of headline research infrastructure at the well, in the Straits Inclosure is our eddy covariance tower. This started off as a mast. So these are photos of the mast that was installed in the late 90s with Matt, my colleague who used to be on this, well, yeah, was on this project until recently, climbing up the middle of the mast. And then, yeah, a load of instrumentation above. I'm not sure how they took this photo, but yeah, yeah, that kind of gives you an idea of what was there before. And then now we have a proper walk-up scaffold tower that's been there since 2012. And this is all to get our sort of main instruments above the canopy so that we can measure the exchange of carbon dioxide between the forest and the atmosphere. And I'll go into, or try and go into a bit more detail on that in a couple of slides' time. But I kind of wanted to give you a little bit of a tour of the tower before I move on. So I've got a video here, and then there are some photos on the right of things you'll maybe see as I'm going up the tower. But I'll start the video, and yeah, I'll pick it up when that's finished. Use the heavy breathing. Yeah, so I thought I'd give you a little bit of a sense of what it feels like to climb up through the canopy and then get above the trees. It's a really, well, it's one of my favorite places. It's a stunning view from the top, and obviously we've got a ton of instruments on the tower that pretty well all of them are continuously taking measurements of environmental variables. Some of the things we saw were the eddy covariance instruments. So that's the photo with the blue sky, and that comprises of a CO2, a carbon dioxide gas analyzer, and a sonic anemometer. So that's measuring wind, well, three-dimensional wind speed and direction. Both of those instruments record at 20 hertz, so 20 times a second. They're making a measurement. We've got a little rain gauge. We've actually got 3 rain gauges up on that tower. We've got these net radiometers, which are measuring the incoming shortwave and long wave radiation, and then also the outgoing shortwave and long wave radiation, so that we can get a kind of we can work up an energy budget for the forest. And then this arm that extends out from the tower a couple of platforms down is measuring chlorophyll fluorescence. I mean, at this time of year, it's just measuring noise because there's no leaves, there's no chlorophyll that's going to be fluorescing. But that's a kind of a good, well, has promise as a good proxy for measuring like photosynthetic uptake. So anyway, yeah, I've mentioned eddy covariance a couple of times without telling you what it is. Oh yeah, this is a photo on a nice autumnal day with the sun setting. It's really beautiful view from up there. So eddy covariance. When we think of wind passing over a landscape, we often think of it as kind of like this horizontal sheet of air that's just moving kind of completely flat across the top. But actually, it's lots of eddies. So lots of rotating eddies of different sizes passing over what is a rough surface, in our case, a forest canopy. And we use these eddies and this kind of upward and downward movement of air combined with the measurements of the carbon dioxide concentration, or you can use other gases as well if you have the right instrumentation. And by looking at the covariance between whether the air's moving up or down and whether the concentration of the gas in question is moving or going up or down, we can work out whether the ecosystem is taking up more of molecules of carbon dioxide, or whether more molecules of carbon dioxide are being released from the forest to the atmosphere. So this is kind of diagram of a surface with no flux. So as the air moves across, there's three molecules. And in the upward portion of the eddy, there's the same number of molecules as there is in the downward portion of the eddy. That kind of makes sense. And then where you've got a flux, so an actual movement of molecules either out of the forest or into the forest, here we've got an upward eddy motions carrying more molecules than the downward motions. So the CO2 molecules in net terms are moving from the forest to the atmosphere. So that's where you've got respiration at a higher rate than photosynthetic uptake. And that's this time of year, there's very little photosynthesis happening. So the net flux in general is going to be is this time of year. The net flux from the forest is out, CO2 moving out of the forest. So from the soil into the atmosphere. When the canopy greens up in late May and we start getting photosynthesis, then we start to see more uptake into the forest. But yeah, as I said, we're measuring this on a really fine scale, and then we average up to half-hour fluxes, and it kind of gives us this kind of record. So this is 1999 to 2020 of net ecosystem production. So the kind of net uptake of carbon dioxide. And these are fluxes in units of tons of carbon dioxide per hectare per month. And you'll see these areas where we've got these positive fluxes here are during the summer, when there's a net uptake. And then during the winter, there's, throughout the winter, kind of net release. So the forest is a source of carbon dioxide. But over the course of a year, there's more uptake than release, and so in net terms, there's more carbon dioxide being absorbed by the forest. But yeah, the whole woodland carbon balance
3 or 4 minutes, Mike.
How many? Sorry.
About 3 or 4 minutes.
Okay, right. I'll go move on. The woodland carbon balance is really complex. We're only measuring kind of with this technique, this top bit. So the kind of in net terms, what's coming in and out of the forest. But there are loads of processes going on in the trees and in the soil that affect this flux. So as well as measuring that kind of using the eddy covariance technique, we also measure specifically what's coming out of the soil. So this is a soil an automated soil carbon dioxide flux chamber, and we've got 8 of these around the tower that close every hour and take a measurement of the carbon dioxide coming out of the soil due to respiration. And then we have this sort of record of soil carbon dioxide flux over the last 4 or 5 years since we've been recording that. And we're sort of interested in how that's affected by soil temperature and soil moisture, so that we can then model this in other places where we can't actually measure it as easily. We also take a whole host of other measurements. I'm really interested in using automatic dendrometers. So these are devices that measure the changes in stem radial increment. So like how the stem expands due to growth, but then also shrinks in periods of water stress, so due to drought, for example. This is a trace of growth for one particular dendrometer over 5 years, each line being a different year. So you can see in some years, growth is really steady throughout the whole year. Other times it's kind of a bit more stunted. In some years, we hardly have any growth at all. 2018, the grey line at the bottom there was a big heat wave year. So there was a heat wave, there was a drought, and this particular tree didn't grow very much at all that year. This is a conifer on a conifer species, by the way, so there can be some growth beyond the typical growing season. Yeah, and then you zoom in on just a few days, and you see yeah, this shrinkage and expansion of the stem as it takes water from the soil. And yeah, this is a beech tree with yeah, just a few days of data showing the shrinkage and expansion of the stem. So that's another thing I'm interested in, and the kind of sensor that we can potentially give access to the data from as part of this project.